3 days before Ren left Atlanta, her mother asked if she was sure. Not about the flight, about him. Ren said she'd never been more sure of anything. She meant it the way people mean things when they've already decided that meaning them will make them true. Her mother watched her for a long moment over the coffee, and then said something Ren wouldn't understand until much later. Just remember you booked your own ticket. Whatever happens over there, you got yourself there. Hold on to that. Ren thought she was being sentimental. Her mother was not a sentimental woman. She was naming the only thing that would be left standing, and her daughter heard a greeting card. His name was Do-yoon. They'd met 18 months earlier, in the least romantic place two people can meet, a dispute over a shipping contract. Ren ran logistics for a mid-sized textile importer. His family's company was the supplier that kept missing dates. She flew to Seoul to tell a room full of men in better suits than hers that she was pulling the account. Do-yoon was the one they sent in to keep it. He didn't charm her. That was the thing she'd keep coming back to. He didn't charm her. He listened, took notes, fixed the problem, and 3 weeks later emailed her a spreadsheet correcting an error in her own forecast, with a single line at the bottom. You were almost right. I like almost. She flew back to Seoul 4 times that year, and told her company each trip was about the contract. 2 of them were, she was 31 and had spent her whole life being the competent one, the sister who handled things, the daughter nobody worried about. She had a title and a 401k, and a condo she'd bought alone, and somewhere underneath all of it a small, unfed thing that wanted, just once, to be chosen rather than relied upon. Do-yoon chose her, or she believed he did. A woman who spent 31 years being reliable, doesn't examine the first person who makes her feel wanted. She closes her eyes and leans. So when he asked her to come to Korea, to come for the engagement, he said, the word landing soft and enormous. She didn't hesitate. She'd built her whole adult life on being the woman who didn't hesitate. She booked the flight herself, paid for it herself. She went to Korea as a decision, not an invitation. She just didn't know whose decision the ring had been. The house was north of the city, up where the air got thinner and the money got quieter. She'd expected something loud, the kind of wealth that announces itself. Instead, it was all pale wood and stone, and a garden so precise it looked drawn rather than grown. Do-yoon met her at the gate himself, no driver. When he took her bag, his hand shook, just slightly. He kissed her forehead in the drive and held her a second longer than the gesture needed, and into her hair he said, I'm glad you came. I need you to know I'm glad you came, whatever happens. He held on a beat past the words, his jaw tight, a man bracing for something. Ren felt the weight of whatever happens and chose to hear it as a man overwhelmed by the size of a commitment. He'd given her a door. She decided not to walk through it. That much was hers. His mother was Mrs. Han. She held both of Ren's hands and told her, in careful English, that she'd heard so much. That she was so glad Ren had come, that it meant a great deal to have her here for this. And her smile arrived a half-second late, the smile of a woman saying true things she wished were about someone else. But Ren, looking at the garden over her shoulder, didn't catch the delay. The house had been arranged for an event. Chairs, flowers, a long table set with a care that meant tonight, not someday. 40 settings if you counted, and Ren counted. She asked Do-yoon, lightly, if this was the engagement dinner. 2 nights from now, he said, and something crossed his face that she called nerves, and he asked whether she'd slept on the plane. That first night she met his grandmother, and this is the thing to hold, because it comes back. The old woman was very old and very sharp, and spoke no English at all. She took Ren's face in both dry hands and studied her with an attention that felt like being read. Then she said something to Do-yoon, at length, and he went still. Ren asked what she'd said. He hesitated. She says you have an honest face, he told her. She says the family is lucky. The old woman nodded like she'd settled something, and patted Ren's cheek. What the grandmother had actually said would take Ren a long time to learn, but not that night. That night she went to bed in the guest room believing an old woman had blessed her into a family. Behind her, in the hall, Do-yoon stood with his back to the grandmother's door for a long moment before he could make himself walk away. Her sister arrived the second morning. Ren hadn't known she was coming. It should have been the first crack. She and Nia were close in the way sisters are close when there's exactly 1 year and a lifetime of comparison between them, and Nia hadn't mentioned Korea, not once. in the weeks Ren had spent talking about nothing else. But when Nia came through that pale wooden door with her carry-on and her easy laugh, Ren's first feeling was pure. She was happy. She thought Do-yoon had done it, flown her sister in as a surprise, so she wouldn't have to join a new family without a piece of her old one in the room. Ren crossed the floor and hugged her and said, "You didn't tell me." Nia held on a beat too long, her eyes shut, her chin over Ren's shoulder where Ren couldn't see it working. "I know," she said. Ren read that as love too. She was reading everything as love. That was the condition she'd arrived in. And this is where the story has to be fair to the version of Ren who had hope, because she had reasons. The whole second day was good. That's the thing nobody says about a trap laid by people who love you. They don't stop loving you while they set it, and the love is real, and it makes the day good. Nia and Ren walked the precise garden, and Nia said she'd taken Korean lessons for work, and Ren believed her, because why wouldn't she? Do-yoon was attentive, almost desperate about it, refilling her cup, translating, laughing at a thing she said at lunch that wasn't that funny, laughing a half-beat too hard, the way a man laughs when laughing is easier than the alternative. Mrs. Han showed her photographs. The grandmother taught her 2 words and clapped when she got them wrong. By evening, Ren was more sure than when she'd landed. She stood at the guest room window, watching the light go blue over that impossible garden, and thought, "This is the beginning of my life." Down the hall, in a room Ren would never see, Nia was sitting on the edge of a bed with a small box in her hands, not opening it, just holding it, while Do-yoon stood at the window with his back to her. Neither of them said anything for a long time. That was the conversation happening in the house that night. Ren was in the wrong room for it. Nia knew the house. That was the detail Ren's body caught before her mind would allow it. It came in pieces across the second day, and she dismissed each one. Nia didn't ask where the bathroom was. She knew which cabinet held the glasses. When Mrs. Han said something in Korean, Nia answered, haltingly, but she answered, and Ren told herself the lessons for work had gone well. When the grandmother saw Nia, the old woman's face did something complicated. Ren had no language to read, and Nia went to her and knelt, and the grandmother touched her hair the way you touch something already yours. Ren thought, how sweet, they've met before. Every explanation she reached for was true adjacent. That's how a good lie works. It doesn't fight the facts. It gets to them first and dresses them. She said nothing. There is a specific silence that comes over a person when the truth is still assembling in the dark, and she kept quiet because naming it would make it real, and she was not ready. She'd flown across the world to not be ready for this. She found the ring by accident, the only mercy in the whole story, because it meant no one chose to show it to her. It was in a drawer in the guest room, and she'd opened the drawer looking for an outlet adapter, a small box. She knew what it was before she touched it. Every woman knows what that box is. She opened it. Of course she opened it. She'd flown 8,000 miles. She wasn't going to be undone by the last 2 inches. The ring was beautiful, and it was not her size. She knew this the way you know your own hands. Slim where hers were wide, delicate where she was not. A card was tucked into the lid in Do-yoon's handwriting, the same hand from the spreadsheet, from You Were Almost Right. The card said a name. The name was Nia. She sat on the floor of that guest room for a long time. There was nothing dignified in it. She sat with the box in her hand and did the math of 18 months, and the math was clean, and it hurt the way clean things hurt. No ragged edge to blame, just the whole flat plane of it, pressed against her. He hadn't flown her to Korea to marry her. He'd flown her to be there, a witness, a blessing. The generous, cosmopolitan sister who'd made the introduction, because she saw it now, a dinner in Seoul 14 months ago, my sister's in town, do you mind if she joins? And who would smile in the photographs and go home and tell their mother it was beautiful. And underneath the betrayal, on that floor, a small ugly voice in her said, of course. Of course it was Nia. It had always, her whole life, eventually been Nia. She hated the voice, and she recognized it, and she understood that some part of her had walked into that house already braced for exactly this, braced since childhood, and that the bracing itself was a wound she'd carried so long she'd stopped feeling it as one. Do-yoon hadn't invented the thing that broke that night. He'd found the fault line and stood on it. Then she did the one thing she built with her own 2 hands. She did not go downstairs and scream. She closed the box, she put it back exactly as she'd found it, card and all, because it was not hers to have opened, and not hers to break. And she made a decision, the first fully hers in 18 months. I am not going to find out from him. I am going to find out from her. She knocked on Nia's door at midnight. Nia opened it already crying. She'd been waiting for this knock since the airport, maybe since Seoul, maybe since a dinner 14 months ago. How long? Ren said. Not a question. Ren, how long, Nia? A year. She said it to the floor. A little more than a year. Then she said the thing that turned the knife in a direction Ren hadn't braced for. I tried to tell you. I called you in March. I got as far as your name, and you were so happy, you said his name like it was a whole sentence. And I hung up and told myself I'd do it in person, and then I ran out of before. I ran out of before. Nia didn't defend herself, but she also didn't lie, and the not lying was what made it unsurvivable. Ren could have hated a schemer. She had the equipment for that. What stood in the doorway instead was her little sister, who'd done a terrible thing slowly, out of cowardice and love and want. The exact 3 things Ren had flown to Korea carrying herself. Nia wasn't a villain. She was Ren, 1 year younger, who'd gotten to the man first. There's something else, Nia said. You need to hear it from me, and not them, and she told her. The engagement wasn't a love match. Or it wasn't only one. Do-yoon's family company, the supplier, the missed dates, the reason Ren had flown to Seoul in the first place, was failing. Quietly, the way old money fails, behind pale wood and precise gardens. Nia hadn't taken Korean for work in the vague way Ren had imagined. She'd taken it because 8 months earlier she'd left their world entirely and gone to work for the very family she was now marrying into, brought in through a connection she'd made through Ren, through a contact Ren had introduced her to, in passing as a favor, 18 months ago, back when she thought she was just being a good sister, networking a good sister. Ren had built the road Nia walked to him. Every plank, the introduction, the contact, the reason the family trusted an American woman at all. That trust was Ren's, established over 4 flights and a corrected spreadsheet, and Nia had inherited it like a hand-me-down coat. He didn't choose me over you, Nia said, and it was the worst kindness anyone offered her the whole trip. He chose the marriage that saved the company, the contract I brought, the investors I brought. He'd have married either of us. It was never about which sister. It was about which sister came with the money. She looked at Ren. You came with the truth. I came with the money. Guess which one this family needed. You have an honest face. The family is lucky. Ren understood, in the doorway, what the grandmother had actually said. Not a blessing, a verdict. This one's the honest one, so she's not the one we use. And now the hope, because it came next, and it was real. Do-yoon found her before she reached her room. He'd heard. Nia had gone to him, or someone had, and he came around the corner with his face already breaking. But he didn't do the apology. That was what undid her. He didn't reach for sorry. He reached for her hand, and said, low and fast, like a man confessing before he lost his nerve. I called it off, an hour ago. I told them I can't do it. She believed him. She believed him because it was true. He'd gone to his mother, he said, and told her the marriage was off, that he'd spent 18 months in love with the wrong sister for the family's purposes, and the right one for his, and that he would not stand in that garden in 2 nights and put a slim, delicate ring on a hand he didn't want. He said the company could fail. He said he'd rather it failed. He stood in that hallway with the whole architecture of his family's survival coming down behind him, and he chose her. Out loud, too late, but he chose her. And 18 months snapped back into place in her chest like a bone reset, and for about 90 seconds she was the woman at the window watching the blue light. This is the beginning of my life. He asked her to stay, not for the engagement, for them. He asked her to let him rebuild it from the wreckage, slower, honest this time, no card in a drawer. He said he'd earn back the 18 months. He was crying, and she was crying, and his hand shook exactly the way it had at the gate, and she understood the shake now. It had never been nerves. It had been a year of this, and she put her hand on his face and began to say yes. She began to say yes. She didn't sleep. She sat at the window until the garden went from black to gray, to the pale gold of a morning she let herself believe would be the first morning of the rebuilt thing, and in that gray hour, before the gold, She made herself do the one thing being the competent one her whole life had been for. She made herself look at the actual shape of what he'd offered, instead of the shape of what she wanted. He'd called it off an hour ago. An hour. After the ring was engraved with her sister's name. After a year. After a house arranged for 40. He hadn't called it off when he wrote the card. He hadn't called it off on any morning of that year. He'd called it off in the 90 seconds after she found out, when the choice stopped being Nia or Ren, and became lose Ren cleanly, or lose her while she watched. He hadn't chosen her over the marriage. He'd chosen, in a panic, the ending where he got to feel like a good man. Even now, even in the confession, he was arranging the story so he'd come out survivable. And Nia would be downstairs, unengaged now, unchosen, having burned her own path to this family for nothing, having lost Ren and him in one night. If Ren stayed, she'd be building her beginning on the exact spot where her sister's whole life had just collapsed. She'd spend every holiday for the rest of her life watching Nia, watch her have the thing they'd both destroyed themselves reaching for. He'd offered her a real hope. That was the cruelty of it. Not a trick, genuine, every word meant. But a true offer can still be one you have to refuse. The realest things sometimes are. She found him at breakfast. He looked up with the whole rebuilt future in his eyes. "No," she said. "This is the part people always think she'll take back." "No," she said. "Not because I don't believe you. I believe you. That's why. You called it off an hour ago. You'd have gone through with it if I'd never opened that drawer. You'd have stood there in 2 nights and married her, and let me clap. The man who chose me last night isn't a man who chose me. He's a man who got caught, and panicked, and would rather lose the company than lose the mirror, where he looks like someone who'd choose me. I've been that mirror for 18 months. I'm done being anyone's mirror." He said he'd prove it. He said give it a year. "You had 18 months, she said. "You spent the last 12 planning my seat at your wedding. I'm not going to marry the story you'd have to tell yourself to live with what you did. And I'm not going to do it to her, either." And this surprised him. And it surprised her, hearing it aloud. "I'm not going to be the sister who stayed and won. She did a terrible thing, so did you. But I'm not spending my life turning her into the loser so I can be the winner of a contest I never agreed to enter. You two can have each other or not. I'm taking myself out of the math entirely." Mrs. Hahn stood at the end of the hall. She'd heard. Her late half-second smile finally made sense. She'd been sorry the whole time, and it hadn't been hers to tell. She called a car. At the door she held both of Ren's hands and said, "You were the honest one. I'm sorry that made you the one we could afford to hurt." She was sorry. Sorry was cheap in that house that night. Everybody had some. The grandmother watched from the window. She raised one dry hand. Ren never learned whether it was a blessing or a goodbye. She decided, for her own sake, it was the first. Here the story lets you hope one more time, because Ren did. The flight home was 14 hours, and somewhere over the Pacific, she decided she'd forgive Nia. Not reconcile, forgive. She thought there was a difference she could live in, a place where she released the poison without opening the door. She landed in Atlanta with a plan for a relationship with her sister that survived at some low, careful temperature. Holidays. Occasional calls. The arithmetic of 2 people who only have each other. Nia called 11 times in the first month. In the second month, Ren answered. They talked, carefully, across a continent and an ocean, for almost half a year. It was working, or Ren told herself it was working, the way she'd told herself so many things. Nia and Da-yoon had not married. The company failed anyway, the way it was always going to, and without the marriage to save it, it took the whole reason they'd been together down with it. They separated inside 3 months. Nia was alone, so was Ren. And in that shared aloneness, they found something that felt, for a while, like a way back. The door was opening. Ren felt it open. The door closed on a Tuesday, over nothing. That was the part no one could have justified for her. The universe didn't even grant a second betrayal to hang it on. They were on the phone. Nia was telling a story from their childhood. A good one they both loved. The kind of story that had always been theirs. And in the middle of it she laughed and said an old family phrase, a thing their grandmother used to say. And under her voice, in the cadence of it, Ren heard the Korean lilt Nia had never fully lost. The accent of a year spent becoming someone in that pale wooden house. And Ren understood, with a totality that arrived like weather, that she was never going to hear her sister's voice again without hearing the year Nia spent learning to belong to the family that had used Ren's honest face as a decoration. Every good memory Nia reached for would arrive carrying the sound of it. Nia hadn't just taken Do-yoon, she'd taken the before. There was no version of her sister left that didn't have him inside her voice. It wasn't rage. Rage burns off. It was quieter and more permanent. The recognition that some things don't heal. They scar over a foreign object, and the object stays, and you feel it every time it's cold. Ren could forgive her sister completely, and it would not give her back a sister whose voice didn't hurt to hear. She said none of this. She let Nia finish the story. She laughed in the right place. Then she said she had to go, and she did have to go, and they hung up, and she sat in her kitchen for a long time and understood she was not going to call back. Not that month. Not that year. Nia married someone else eventually. Not Do-yoon, someone kind, someone Ren would never meet. She sent an invitation, real cardstock, Ren's name spelled right. Ren sat with it at her kitchen table for a long time, then wrote back one line, because they'd both been good at one-liners. They'd learned from the same man. I hope he's someone you never have to fly across the world to find out the truth about. She mailed it. She was never fully at peace with how hard it was, and never once wished she'd softened it. Both true. She stopped needing them to resolve. They don't speak. Their mother sees Nia. Ren asked her not to make it a war, not to pick, and she doesn't. And it costs her something every holiday that Ren tries not to think about too hard. Their mother holds the middle, the way she held the back of Ren's neck at a stoplight the night Ren came home, and says nothing, and pays a price no one will ever fully know, for loving two daughters who can't be in the same room. Do-yoon wrote once, 2 years on. One line, of course. You were right about the mirror. I'm sorry it took losing everything to see my own face. Ren didn't answer, not out of cruelty. There was simply nothing left in her that his sorry could reach. He'd finally learned the lesson. It was only that the lesson had never been hers to grade. She flew to Korea for her engagement. That sentence was true when she booked the ticket. A true sentence built on a false floor, and the floor was not her fault. You can do everything with your own hands. Book your own flight, cross your own ocean, refuse your own shame, even forgive, and still not get the ending back. Agency doesn't protect you from other people's plans, doesn't guarantee reconciliation, doesn't reward you with a sister at the end. It only determines what you do in the 30 seconds after you find the card, and the 6 months when the door seems to open, and the Tuesday when it closes for good over nothing at all. She closed the box, she put it back. She went to her sister first, her mother second, the man dead last, in the exact order of who she'd actually lost. She said no to the true offer, because a true offer can still be the wrong life. She opened the door to forgiveness and found that forgiveness and return are not the same country. She left with her name still hers, and, to be honest, her name is a smaller thing to be left holding than she'd wanted at the end. It doesn't call her on Sundays. It doesn't remember their grandmother's phrases. It's just hers, and it's clean, and some nights that is nowhere near enough and still the only thing she would not trade. She flew to Korea for her engagement. She didn't come home with a wedding. She didn't come home with her sister. She came home with the truth, and her own 2 hands, and a mother at a stoplight who told her she'd done the last part right. And she spent 2 years learning that the last part right and a happy ending are not the same thing, that some stories give you only the first, and that you take it, because it's what there is, and you build a life on it, because the alternative is building a life on a lie in a drawer. The ring was never meant for her. Neither, it turned out, was the sister she flew home believing she could keep. Some doors close from both sides at once. Hers did. She doesn't build her life toward their opening anymore. She just lives in the house she has, alone in it, and honest, and hers.